We hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. Alexander Alex Carrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, surveying the city's skyline. At 42, he cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. As the CEO of an international logistics company, Alex had built his empire through a relentless need for control and perfection. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, your son is here to see you." "Send him in," Alex replied, his stern expression softening slightly. 10-year-old Max bounded into the room, Claire's iPhone clutched in his small hands. "Dad, what's a prenup?" Alex froze, his blood running cold. "Where did you hear that word, Max?" "It was in Mom's email," Max said innocently, holding up the phone. With forced casualness, Alex took the device from his son. His heart nearly stopped as he saw the email chain between Claire and her divorce lawyer. They were plotting to leave him, waiting for his father's inheritance. But something had changed. "Max, why don't you go play in my secretary's office for a bit?" Alex said, his voice tight. "I need to talk to your mother." As Max left, Alex strode purposefully towards the elevator, his mind racing. He found Claire in their sprawling penthouse, lounging on a chaise with a fashion magazine. "Care to explain this?" Alex said, tossing the phone onto the coffee table. Claire's face drained of color as she saw the screen. She snatched the phone, her eyes darting between it and Alex. "How dare you look through my private emails?" "Our son found it," Alex replied coldly. "Now explain." Claire's shoulders sagged, then straightened as a cold smile played across her lips. "I was waiting for your dad's inheritance," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "But plans changed now." Alex felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. But he wasn't done. With a smile, he pulled out his own phone, showing Claire a series of damning photos, her locked in an intimate embrace with Mark, one of his top employees and an old friend. "You won't get a dime," Alex said softly. "You cheated." "Remember the prenup?" Claire's shocked silence gave way to disbelief. "How do you know?" Without hesitation, Alex's voice turned to ice. "You're done. Pack your things. Tonight." Claire, panicked, began to realize the magnitude of her mistake. But it was too late. Alex had already turned his back, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions. Mark Stevens sat in a dimly lit bar, nursing his third whiskey of the night. His phone buzzed incessantly, Claire's name flashing on the screen with increasingly frantic messages. He knew their plan had unraveled spectacularly. Across town, Claire paced in a luxury hotel room, her designer luggage a stark contrast to her disheveled appearance. She'd underestimated Alex, but she wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, Alex strode into Carrington Logistics, employees scattering before his thunderous expression. In his office, he immediately called his head of security. "I want Mark Stevens' access revoked. All of it. Now." His voice left no room for questions. But Mark was already a step ahead. Before his access was cut, he'd managed to funnel sensitive business information to several of Carrington Logistics' biggest competitors. Claire, meanwhile, was plotting her own revenge. With her sharp social skills, she began reaching out to her extensive network, spreading rumors about Alex's crumbling empire and tarnishing his once flawless image. As Alex sat in his office, reviewing the damage reports, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, there's a Victor Zorin on line 1 for you." Alex's eyes narrowed. Victor Zorin, the ruthless Russian oligarch who'd been eyeing his company for years. He picked up the phone, his voice cool and controlled. "Zorin, what can I do for you?" "Alexander," Zorin's heavily accented voice oozed false sympathy. "I heard about your recent troubles. Perhaps now is a good time to discuss that merger we've been dancing around." Alex's grip tightened on the phone. "Carrington Logistics is not for sale, Zorin. Not now, not ever." As he hung up, Alex realized he wasn't just fighting a personal betrayal. This was a direct threat to his entire empire. Alex sat across from Liam Quinn, a brilliant but morally ambiguous investigator he'd hired to dig up dirt on Claire, Mark, and Zorin. Liam's findings were worse than he'd imagined. "They've been stealing from the company for months," Liam explained, sliding a file across the desk. "They plan to bankrupt you, destroy your empire, and flee the country with the spoils." Alex's jaw clenched as he reviewed the evidence. At that moment, his phone rang. It was his CFO. "Sir, we have a problem. Zorin's just launched a series of strategic moves that's crippling our supply chain." Hanging up, Alex knew he had to act fast. He arranged an emergency meeting with Zoran at an exclusive private club. The Russian oligarch sat across from him, smug and overconfident. "Your company is on its knees, Alexander. I'm offering to buy you out at a fraction of its worth. It's more than generous, considering the circumstances." Alex leaned forward. "You underestimate me, Zoran. This isn't over." As he left the meeting, Alex's mind was already formulating a plan. He'd not only survive this onslaught, but annihilate all his enemies in the process. Back at his office, Alex initiated his counterattack. Using the evidence Liam had uncovered, he filed a countersuit against Claire and Mark, accusing them of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. He then began systematically removing Mark's influence from within the company, firing his associates and cutting off his access to company funds. It was a surgical strike, precise and devastating. As night fell over the city, Alex stood at his office window, looking out at the empire he'd built. The battle had only just begun, but Alexander Carrington was a man who played to win, and win he would, no matter the cost. Claire Carrington stood in the middle of her rented apartment, surrounded by designer luggage that looked out of place in the modest space. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against her phone screen as she scrolled through her contacts. She needed an ally, someone who could help her turn the tables on Alex. Her finger hovered over a name: Andrea Wells, investigative journalist. A cold smile played across Claire's lips as she hit the call button. "Andrea, it's Claire Carrington. I have a story for you. How do you like an exclusive on the dark side of Alexander Carrington's empire?" Across town, Alex sat in his office, reviewing the latest reports on the damage Claire and Mark had done. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, there's a Ms. Wells from the Tribune on line 1. She's asking for a comment on some allegations." Alex's eyes narrowed. So, the war had begun in earnest. He picked up the phone, his voice cool and controlled. "Ms. Wells, what can I do for you?" As Andrea laid out the accusations: corruption, abusive leadership, shady dealings, Alex listened silently, his mind already formulating a counter-strategy. When she finished, he spoke only 2 words: "No comment." He hung up and immediately dialed Liam Quinn. "I need everything you've got on Claire and Mark." Now, days passed, and the city buzzed with rumors. Headlines screamed of Alex's alleged misdeeds, each more damning than the last. Claire watched from the sidelines, a smug smile on her face as she fed Andrea a steady stream of half-truths and fabrications. Mark, still smarting from his humiliating exit from Carrington Logistics, provided insider details that lent credibility to their claims. But Claire wasn't satisfied with merely tarnishing Alex's reputation. She wanted to hit him where it truly hurt. "I want full custody of Max," she told her lawyer, her voice hard. "Paint Alex as an unfit father. Use whatever means necessary." Max, caught in a crossfire, retreated into himself. At school, he overheard whispers about his father, saw the pitying looks from teachers. At home with Alex, he felt the tension, the barely contained fury that radiated from his father. He didn't understand what was happening, only that his world was falling apart. Alex, for his part, had anticipated this move. As Claire's lawyer filed for emergency custody, Alex's team was ready with a counterpunch. They leaked their own story to the press, a sordid tale of Claire's affair, her theft from the company, her manipulation of Max for her own gain. The public's sympathy, fickle as always, began to shift. Claire found herself on the receiving end of scathing editorials and vicious social media posts. Her carefully cultivated image as the wronged wife crumbled. In the courtroom, Alex's lawyers were relentless. They presented evidence of Claire's infidelity, her attempts to circumvent the prenup, her plans to flee the country with company funds. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with steely eyes, listened impassively. When the gavel fell, Claire's world collapsed. Custody is awarded to the father, Alexander Carrington. The mother, Claire Carrington, is granted supervised visitation pending further review. Claire stumbled from the courtroom, her designer heels clicking on the marble floors. Outside, a sea of reporters waited, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. She pushed past them, her face a mask of despair and rage. Alex emerged moments later, Max's small hand clutched in his. He faced the cameras, his expression grim but composed. "Justice has been served," he said simply. "My son and I ask for privacy during this difficult time." As they drove away, Max looked up at his father. "Dad, is it over now?" Alex's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Not yet, son," he said softly. "But it will be soon." Mark Stevens sat in a dingy motel room, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles and crumpled papers. His laptop glowed in the dim light, displaying financial reports and internal memos from Carrington Logistics. He'd been poring over them for days, looking for a weakness, any chink in Alex's armor. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered warily. Stevens. Mr. Stevens. The voice was heavily accented, Russian. I believe we have a mutual interest in Alexander Carrington's downfall. Mark sat up straighter. Who is this? A friend. One who can provide the resources you need to finish what you started. It was Zoran. Mark's mind raced. This was his last chance to strike back at Alex. I'm listening, he said. Across the city, in his penthouse office, Alex was in the middle of a video conference when alarms began blaring from his computer. Red warning messages flashed across multiple screens. Sir, his head of IT's panic voice came through the speakers. We're under attack. Massive data breaches. Our logistics software is compromised. Shipments are being rerouted. Alex's face hardened. He'd been expecting this, but the scale of the attack was beyond anything he'd anticipated. Initiate Protocol Omega, he ordered. Now, as Carrington Logistics descended into chaos, Alex remained eerily calm. He watched as shipments were delayed, contracts were breached, and the company's stock price plummeted. His phone rang incessantly, board members, partners, media outlets all demanding answers. In his secret command center, buried deep beneath the Carrington Tower, Alex monitored the situation. Liam Quinn stood beside him, relaying real-time intelligence. It's Mark, Liam confirmed. He's working with a team of elite hackers. But there's more. He's got backing from Zoran. Serious backing. Alex nodded, unsurprised. And our countermeasures. Liam grinned, a predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. In place and ready. Just say the word. Alex's finger hovered over a button on the console before him. He thought of Claire, of Mark, of all those who had betrayed him, of Max, caught in the middle of this war. His jaw clenched. Execute, he said. Across the city, in his motel room, Mark was celebrating. His laptop showed the carnage unfolding at Carrington Logistics. Zoran was on speakerphone, his satisfaction evident even through the tinny sound. Excellent work, Mr. Stevens, Zoran purred. Carrington is finished. I'll have my people draw up the acquisition papers immediately. Mark grinned, pouring himself another drink. Here's to the fall of Alexander Carrington, he toasted. But as he raised the glass to his lips, his screen went black. Then, line by line, text began to appear. Did you really think it would be that easy, Mark? Mark's blood ran cold. He recognized that writing style. No, he whispered. No, no, no. His phone died. The lights flickered and went out. In the darkness, Mark heard heavy footsteps approaching his door. Zoran, in his lavish Moscow office, frowned as his connection with Mark was suddenly cut. He barked orders at his subordinates, demanding to know what was happening. But as reports began flooding in of frozen assets, of raids on his properties, of arrest warrants issued in multiple countries, he realized with growing horror that he'd underestimated Alexander Carrington for the last time. Back in New York, Alex watched him passively as FBI agents led a handcuffed Mark from the motel. On another screen, he saw Zoran being escorted from his office by Russian authorities. Liam whistled low. Remind me never to get on your bad side, boss. Alex didn't respond. He stared at the screens, at the empire he'd saved, at the enemies he'd destroyed. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt empty. His phone buzzed. A text from Max. Dad, when are you coming home? Alex closed his eyes, suddenly weary. It's over, he said softly. Let's go home. Claire Carrington stood in the lobby of Carrington Tower, her designer outfit a stark contrast to her haggard appearance. She clutched her handbag like a lifeline as she approached the receptionist. I need to see Alex, Mr. Carrington, she said, her voice hoarse. Please, it's urgent. The receptionist's eyes widened in recognition, but she kept her composure. One moment, please. In his office, Alex was reviewing the final reports on the Zoran takedown when his intercom buzzed. Mr. Carrington, your ex-wife is here to see you. Alex's jaw clenched. He considered turning her away, but curiosity won out. Send her up. When Claire entered, Alex was standing by the window, his back to her. She took a hesitant step forward. Alex, save it. He cut her off, turning to face her. His eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth or recognition. "What do you want, Claire?" She flinched at his tone, but pressed on. "I've made a terrible mistake. I see that now. I'll leave Mark. I'll do anything. Please, just give me another chance." Alex laughed, harsh, bitter sound that made Claire step back. "Another chance? You tried to destroy me, Claire. You used our son as a pawn in your little game. And now what? You think you can bat your eyelashes and all will be forgiven?" He moved to his desk, pressing a button. A holographic display sprang to life, showing social media feeds, news articles, financial reports. "You're done, Claire. Your name is mud in every circle that matters. No one will hire you, partner with you, or even be seen with you in public." Claire's face crumpled as the reality of her situation sank in. "What have you done?" she whispered. "I've ruined you," Alex said simply. "Just like you tried to ruin me. The difference is I succeeded." Tears streamed down Claire's face as she sank into a chair. "What about Max? He needs his mother." Alex's expression hardened further. "You lost the right to call yourself his mother when you used him to try and hurt me. He's better off without you." As if on cue, Alex's phone buzzed. A text from Mark's lawyer. "Client willing to make deal. Full confession in exchange for reduced sentence." Alex showed the message to Claire, watching as the last bit of fight left her eyes. "It's over, Claire. Mark's going to prison, and he's taking what's left of your reputation with him." Claire stood on shaky legs, her world collapsing around her. As she reached the door, Alex spoke one last time. "Oh, and Claire, I bought out the Tribune. Andrea Wells won't be writing any more stories about me, or you." The door closed behind her with a final, damning click. Alex turned back to the window, looking out over the city he now unquestionably ruled. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt hollow. His phone buzzed again. "Max, Dad, can we have pizza tonight?" A small smile tugged at Alex's lips. Perhaps not completely hollow after all. In a maximum security prison upstate, Mark Stevens sat in his cell, staring at the blank wall. His lawyer had just left, confirming that his plea deal had been accepted. He'd spend the next decade behind bars, but at least he'd avoided the life sentence Zoran was facing. As night fell over New York, 3 lives lay in ruins. Claire, once the toast of society, now a pariah, wandering the streets with nowhere to go. Mark, locked away, his ambitions turned to ash. And Zoran, his vast criminal empire dismantled, facing justice in a Russian court. And at the top of it all stood Alexander Carrington, the man who had orchestrated their downfall. He had won, utterly and completely. Victor Zoran stood at the window of his Moscow penthouse, a glass of vodka in his hand, staring out at the city lights. His reflection in the glass showed a man consumed by fury and obsession. Alexander Carrington had humiliated him, dismantled his operations, and left him a shell of his former self. But Zoran was far from finished. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "It's done. The syndicate is ready." Zoran's lips curled into a cold smile. He'd spent months rebuilding his network, calling in favors from the darkest corners of the criminal underworld. Now, backed by an influential Eastern European crime syndicate, he was ready to strike back at Carrington with a vengeance. Across the ocean, Alex Carrington sat in his office, reviewing quarterly reports. The past few months had been quiet, too quiet. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, we have a situation." Alex's eyes narrowed. "What kind of situation?" "Sir, we're under attack. Massive cyber attacks across all our systems. Our firewalls are failing." Alex's jaw clenched. He'd been waiting for this. Initiate Protocol Omega. Now, but as the hours ticked by, it became clear that this was no ordinary attack. Zoran had learned from his past mistakes. This time, he wasn't just targeting Carrington Logistics. He was going after Alex's entire empire. Banks reported suspicious activities in Alex's accounts. Stock prices plummeted as sensitive information was leaked to the media. Investors panicked, pulling out in droves. Alex stood in his war room, surrounded by screens displaying the chaos unfolding across his businesses. Liam Quinn burst in. "Boss, it's worse than we thought. Zoran's got a team of corrupt lawyers filing international lawsuits against us. Environmental damage, labor violations, you name it. They're trying to bleed us dry." Alex's mind raced, calculating moves and countermoves. But before he could respond, another alert blared. Sir, his head of security's voice crackled over the intercom. We've detected an unauthorized entry at your private residence. Max. The line went dead. For the first time in years, Alex felt a cold fear grip his heart. Get me to the house. Now. The drive to his mansion was a blur. As they approached, Alex saw signs of a struggle, broken glass, overturned furniture. He charged inside, calling for his son. Dad. Max's voice came from upstairs. Alex took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into his son's room. Max was huddled in a corner, shaken but unharmed. Near the window lay a man in black, unconscious. Are you okay? Alex asked, pulling Max into a tight embrace. Max nodded, his voice muffled against his father's chest. I remembered what you taught me. About being prepared. Alex's throat tightened with a mixture of pride and guilt. He taught his son to be strong, to be a survivor. But at what cost? As security swarmed the house, Alex's phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Carrington, Zoran's voice, smooth as silk. I trust one have your attention now. Alex's voice was cold fury. You made a grave mistake, Zoran. Oh, I don't think so. This is just the beginning. I'm going to take everything from you, Carrington. Your money, your power, your legacy. And when you have nothing left, when you're broken and begging for mercy, then I'll end you. The line went dead. Alex looked at Max, still clinging to him, then at the chaos around them. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had he underestimated Zoran? Had his arrogance put everything and everyone he cared about at risk? But as quickly as it came, the doubt vanished, replaced by a cold, implacable resolve. Zoran wanted a war. He'd give him one. Alex turned to Liam, who stood waiting for orders. Call the team. It's time we finish this. Once and for all. The safe house was a nondescript brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, its basement converted into a high-tech command center. Alex sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by his most trusted advisors and operatives. Liam Quinn stood his right hand, looking like he hadn't slept in days. All right, Alex said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Zoran thinks he's got us on the ropes. It's time we show him how wrong he is. Liam, what have you got? Liam tapped a tablet, and holographic displays sprang to life around the room. We've identified the key players in Zoran's syndicate. His money men, his enforcers, his political connections. They're spread across Eastern Europe and Asia, but they all report to this man. A photo appeared, a severe-looking man with cold eyes. Dmitry Volkov, Zoran's right-hand man, and the architect of the cyber attacks against us. Alex studied the face, committing it to memory. And our plan. We hit them where it hurts, Liam said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. We've got teams ready to move on their money laundering operations in Cyprus, their weapon caches in Ukraine, their drug routes through Turkey. When we're done, Zoran's entire network will be in chaos. Alex nodded, then turned to his head of legal affairs. And the lawsuits. The lawyer smiled thinly. We've got countersuits ready to file in every jurisdiction. More importantly, we've uncovered evidence of judicial bribery. When this gets out, half the judges on Zoran's payroll will be facing charges of their own. One by one, Alex's team laid out their strategies. Financial attacks to freeze Zoran's assets. Media campaigns to turn public opinion. Backdoor diplomacy to ensure international cooperation in taking down the syndicate. As the meeting wound down, Alex stood. You all know what's at stake here. Zoran thinks he can destroy everything we've built. We're going to show him the true meaning of destruction. Execute the plan. No mercy, no quarter. The team dispersed, each member heading out to set the gears of Alex's counterattack in motion. But as they filed out, Liam hung back. Boss, there's one more thing, he said, his voice low. I think I've found a way to lure Zoran out into the open. But it's risky. Alex raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Liam outlined his plan, false lead about a multi-billion-dollar deal in Dubai. Too tempting for Zoran to resist. But it would require Alex to put himself in the line of fire. It's dangerous, Liam finished. But if it works, we can end this once and for all. Alex was silent for a long moment, weighing the risks. Then he nodded. Do it, but make sure Max is secure. I won't let Zoran use him against me again. As Liam left to set the trap, Alex stood alone in the command center. He thought of Claire, of Mark, of all the enemies he'd vanquished to get here. Zoran was just the latest in a long line of those who'd underestimated him. He'd be the last. Thousands of miles away, in a luxurious Moscow apartment, Zoran received an encrypted message. His eyes widened as he read the details of Carrington's supposed deal in Dubai. "Prepare the jet," he barked at his assistant. "We're going to the Middle East." The pieces were in place. The final battle was about to begin. Days later, Alex stood in the opulent lobby of Dubai's most exclusive hotel, surrounded by the world's business elite. The trap was set. Now all he had to do was wait for Zoran to take the bait. He didn't have to wait long. A commotion at the entrance drew his attention. Victor Zoran strode in, flanked by bodyguards, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Alex. For a moment, the two men stared at each other across the crowded lobby. Then Zoran smiled, a cold, predatory grin, and began making his way towards Alex. But before he could reach him, chaos erupted. Police swarmed in from every entrance, shouting orders in Arabic and English. Zoran's face contorted in rage as he realized he'd been set up. "Carrington," he roared, lunging forward. But it was too late. Officers tackled him to the ground, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Alex watched him passively as Zoran was led away, still shouting threats and obscenities. It was over. The man who had threatened everything he held dear was finished. As the dust settled, Alex's phone buzzed. A text from Liam. "It's done. Volkov and the others are in custody. The syndicate is finished." Alex allowed himself a small smile. He'd won, again. But as he looked around at the chaos he'd orchestrated, he felt no joy, no triumph. Just a hollow emptiness. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Mac's dad. "Are you okay? When are you coming home?" Alex closed his eyes, suddenly weary. It was time to go home. Time to face the consequences of the world he'd created. Months passed. The world watched in awe as Victor Zoran's criminal empire crumbled, its tentacles severed one by one. Alexander Carrington emerged from the ashes stronger than ever, his company's stock soaring to unprecedented heights. Alex stood in his newly renovated office, looking out over the city he now unquestionably ruled. The skyline was dotted with buildings bearing the Carrington name, a testament to his expanding empire. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he called, not turning around. Max entered, now a young man of 16, the spitting image of his father. "The board is waiting, Dad. They're ready for your presentation on the Zoran acquisitions." Alex nodded, allowing himself a small smile. He'd taken control of Zoran's legitimate business assets, expanding his reach into markets he'd only dreamed of before. His strategic mind had thrived in the aftermath of his victory, turning near defeat into unparalleled success. As they walked to the boardroom, Alex studied his son. Max had witnessed the darker side of his rise to power, had seen the ruthlessness required to survive in this world. But he'd also seen his father's intelligence, his resilience, his unwavering determination. "Remember, Max," Alex said as they paused outside the boardroom. "In this world, you're either the predator or the prey. Always be prepared. Always be 3 steps ahead." Max nodded, his eyes serious. "I know, Dad. You've taught me well." For a moment, Alex saw a flicker of something in his son's eyes, admiration mixed with caution. Max respected his father's strength, his ability to overcome any obstacle. But he was careful not to emulate the cold ruthlessness that had defined Alex's path to the top. As the board meeting progressed, Alex laid out his plans for further expansion. The other executives listened in awe and fear, knowing that to cross Alexander Carrington was to court destruction. He'd proven that with Claire, with Mark, with Zoran. Mercy and forgiveness were weaknesses he could no longer afford. Later that evening, Alex stood on the balcony of his penthouse, a glass of scotch in hand. The city sprawled before him, a glittering testament to his power. For the first time in his life, he felt truly untouchable. He thought back to the day Max had innocently asked about prenups, setting in motion the chain of events that had led him here. He felt no regret for the choices he'd made, the lives he'd destroyed. In his mind, they had been obstacles to overcome, nothing more. The world was a battlefield, and Alexander Carrington had emerged the undisputed victor. As the sun set over his empire, Alex allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of his reign, and he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Behind him, he heard Max's footsteps. His son joined him at the railing, looking out over the city. It's incredible, isn't it? Max said softly. Everything you've built. Alex nodded, putting an arm around his son's shoulders. And someday it'll all be yours. Max was silent for a moment, then turned to face his father. Dad, do you ever wonder, was it worth it? The cost of getting here. Alex met his son's gaze, seeing in it a warmth and humanity that he himself had long since abandoned. For a brief moment, he felt a flicker of doubt, but he pushed it aside. In this world, Max, you take what you want or watch someone else take it from you. I chose to take it. Remember that. Max nodded slowly, turning back to the view. But Alex saw the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between admiration for his father's achievements and unease at the methods used to attain them. In that moment, Alex realized that while he had conquered the world, there was one thing he might never fully possess: his son's unquestioning allegiance to his worldview. Max would forge his own path, shaped by but not beholden to his father's legacy. And strangely, Alex found he was okay with that. Perhaps it was Max's role to be the one thing his empire had lacked: a moral compass, a reminder of the humanity he'd sacrificed on his climb to the top. As night fell over the city, father and son stood side by side, overlooking the empire they would shape together. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and challenges yet to come. Alexander Carrington had won his war. Now, with Max by his side, it was time to secure his legacy for generations to come. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.